Alright, to end off the Big Bad Evil Guy series, I'm going to use in good old Drow Priestess, Erelal freth. Good old Drow Priestess. So, probably mispronouncing the name and everything, so of course my pronunciations and stuff is atrocious, so bear with me. Erelal freth, Drow Priestess of Loth, is the commander of the House Freth fortress deep in the Undermountain. She oversees all House Freth ventures, with her brother Driven as her advisor. The pregnant Erelal wears a flowing black and silver gown instead of armor, but is still armed with her scourge. Those who come to her with frivolous affairs are scolded, threatened, and sent away with a stern warning not to trouble her again. Now, the reason why I'm introducing this to end off the series, the Erelith Freth, the Drow Priestess, as a to end the Big Bad Evil Guy is Drow are in earlier iterations are pretty much one of the stereotypical Big Bad Evil guys or the Big Bad Evil races to say, and of course in the R.A. Salvatore's books you see Drist pretty much rebel against the whole society of Menzoberranzan, and he's able to make it to the surface and kind of goes against the grain, goes against the norm of Drow society. So there are two different kind of options or two different roads you can go down with the good old Drow. You can go down the typical path that's in previous iterations and say oh hey, this race is totally evil, and introduce not just the Erelal here as kind of the head honcho, but oh, the whole race is evil and irredeemable. Now, what you could do is go down another road, and I'll probably come at this angle is that yeah, there are evil Drow, and Erelal is kind of maybe the head honcho of being a priestess of Lolth, the Spider Queen herself. Introduce her as okay, yes, she's the big bad evil guy that's fallen the in a sense evil deity. You can also introduce now Drow in a sense okay, maybe you have several Drow houses that are rebelling against the status quo, the fallen Loth and everything, and maybe you follow a city state, so you introduce Drow as heroes. So this is a perfect example where you can run a campaign in the Underdark, in the Forgotten Realms, Menzoberranzan, Jed Nassid, and there was a whole series the War of the Spider Queen that was released close to probably 20 years ago now. But you could do something similar to that where you have Drow characters, and so you have a Drow fighter, a Drow wizard, and maybe you have a Drow cleric that follows a different god or goddess or whatever. So you're introducing maybe a whole house that now has moved outside of maybe he says Erelal is in an Undermountain. So what comes to mind is still in Forgotten Realms, the Undermountain underneath Waterdeep. You could do something like that. Maybe a house there has now completely rebelled against the Drow's evil ways. You introduce now the Drow, as I said, as good guys, and in a sense, here's your big bad evil guy that's trying to bring that wayward house back into the fold. Hey, look, you can't do this. We're all servants of Lolth herself, and we need to maintain the status quo. This house, where you introduce the player characters, PCs, as a Drow heroes, like I said, the typical the stereotypical roles. Usually it's matriarchal in nature. So usually males are your fighters and wizards, and your females are usually your priestesses of Loth. So hence your big bad evil guy in this regard. Now with your heroes, now of course you could have a Drow priestess. Maybe they found their way to the elven deity of Corellon, Corellon. I'm probably again butchering the names and everything and the pronunciation, so just bear with me. So now they break off and in a sense want to rejoin their surface dwelling cousins of the Sun Elves, the Moon Elves, and the Wood Elves, using Forgotten Realms terminology. So your heroes are leading the charge and bringing their Drow house in a sense away from evil ways into in a sense back to the light, for lack of a better term. So now you're introducing Erelal here as like I said, the big bad evil guy that's trying to bring them back into the fold. And so your PCs could go like in a sense on like a crash course to, in a sense, you could write her up as like a level 20 cleric and everything, and like through the course of the campaign you fight her underlings, and like maybe like using previous videos, like you using like the hobgoblin as like kind of like a low level, like she sends the a hobgoblin warlord after them to kind of like snuff them out. And so like maybe the first like 4 or 5 levels, you in a sense, in a campaign sense, you use them kind of breaking away and getting to the surface, but the hobgoblin and his minions and everything are now trying to waylay them and stop them. And then like in the course of like the first section of the campaign, you defeat the hobgoblin warlord. And of course like of course the Erelal is kind of like a background big bad evil guy, uh, and or in this guy gal. And so she's sending the hobgoblins kind of since doing her dirty work, and of course the PCs foil them. Then maybe like she sends like the Jinn after him for like maybe like levels 5 to 10 or something. Like as they make it to the surface, and she sends them after him. They through the course of several adventures, they defeat the Jinn, and then maybe through like levels like at 10 to 15, Erelal here is now starting to take a more direct approach. Like, oh hey, look, I need to start to take things in like matters of my own hand. Fine, I'll do it myself. Maybe she like building upon like previous video with like the Yuan-Ti, she now summons a bunch of Yuan-Ti, brings them and like starts leading war parties against the parties, the PCs themselves. So like levels like a 10 to 15, you're now seeing Erelal kind of take more direct approach, like with her minions, like the Yuan-Ti, using previous video concept and everything. And of course, again, the PCs through like the course of adventures defeat those minions, and then from like level 15, you pretty much set up the final like level 15 to level 20. You set up the final stage, the final showdown with the Erelal and her like direct minions and her direct supporters and everything. So this is in a way like to, in a sense, create like a whole campaign based around just the Drow, and using the concept of like not all Drow are evil. So you can kind of introduce that as like in the sense that your PCs are Drow. And like I said, they're trying to like in a sense bring the Drow back from like evil ways or something. So that's a good way to like introduce something like that. Now, of course, that's just one example that you could use. Now, like you could use like a traditional party, like maybe like dwarven cleric, maybe a human fighter. You have like an elven wizard and half-elf rogue that like all come together, and maybe like they come together to thwart Erelal, her threat, because maybe she's now starting to like send raiding parties up to the surface, and now like the maybe some high ranking mage or like a noble or like aristocrat, like a king, duke or something, is being threatened. Like their kingdom is being threatened by these raids by Erelal, so they bring the party together to kind of stop that. So that's more of like a traditional sense. So there are so many different options that you could use to like be able to introduce like Erelal here as the big bad evil guy. So I just happened to do 2 examples. The primary one was pretty much using Drow as in a sense of, hey, look, we actually have good characters that are just happen to be Drow. Now the prime example, like I mentioned, was Drist in R.A. Salvatore's books. So you could, in a sense, use that as an example for a character. Now, obviously, you wouldn't necessarily create Drist verbatim. I mean, you could, but like I said, like you could do like you'd probably write him up at like your Drow like fighter, maybe similar to him. A Drow wizard, you wouldn't necessarily like, use Drist as an example, because like Drist is more like a fighter, ranger type character, and you're writing up a wizard. So these are just this is just a template to be able to give an idea to people. Hey, here's something, a new idea to be able to use to introduce like how to like introduce not only the Drow as the stereotypical enemies, but now in a way use the stereotypical villain to introduce like the race that has traditionally been viewed as totally evil and irredeemable, and except in like lone occasions, like the character Driss that I've mentioned. You could actually run a campaign like, oh hey, look, here's more examples on how like Drow can actually be good. And so like laying out like the campaign, I said with the using Erelal here as pretty much like the driving force behind the whole campaign and being like the big bad evil guy, or the one that's behind the scenes at least initially, and then as the your group progresses through the levels, becomes more and more directly involved, and then pretty much takes on the characters directly. But pretty much once they get up to like like I said, Ryder up as like a level 20 character, and then as your party gets up to level 20, they take her on head on. So now what I laid out was just one example of how you could go about doing it and everything. So this is just pretty much to end the big bad evil guy series before I start to get into like character creation for some of the other books that I have. I'll be getting into things like Symborum, Blue Rose. I'll be doing like a Pathfinder, probably Trinity, Aberrant, like all the books that I have done flip throughs for. So like if you want if you're looking forward to that, don't hesitate to go back to the previous videos and see those flip throughs that I've done, so you can at least get a basic understanding of like, oh hey, look, he's making a character on this game. All right, so at least I have a basic understanding of it. So this is to end, like I said, the Big Bad Evil Guy series, and up next will be Character Creation series.